Just when you thought Nintendo had elevated the Zelda series to its peak with Tears of the Kingdom, they have done something that nobody thought possible. Released a Zelda game where you actually play as Zelda. The real question is, why isn't this called The Adventure of Link? But the real question is this return to 2D Zelda worth checking out? Let's talk about it. I've always been a fan of the 2D Zelda games, more so than the 3D ones. I think I just grew up playing these games on my Game Boy, starting with the Game Boy Advance port of A Link to the Past, the Oracle of Ages and Seasons games, which I still hold as the best Zelda games. Those are some personal favorites of mine. Minish Cap, all those games. For me, Zelda is these 2D top-down view games. So I was super excited when they announced Echoes of Wisdom, a return to the 2D classic Zelda view with a nice little twist with this Echoes mechanic. But I was nervous about exactly what the feel of the game was going to be. The trailers for the game really made it look like a puzzle game, and I was not sure exactly what the layout of the game would be. Happily for me, this game is essentially just a 2D classic Zelda game. You explore Hyrule, there's a number of dungeons for you to go through. The Echoes mechanic just sort of replaces the classic Zelda mechanic of, here's this dungeon will give you an item that enhances your traversal, which you then kind of use in that dungeon and maybe a little bit out in the world. The Echoes mechanic is actually really cool. They essentially give you all of those traversal mechanics, all of those options from the get-go. It's essentially just, here's everything, have fun. And especially the first dungeon or two, this game really shines and shows sort of the potential of what they've done here. Unfortunately, I feel like the game devolves really quickly because you, again, get all the traversal mechanics for the most part right off the offset, and there's really not a lot of diversity in approaches. I pretty much found myself just always making bed staircases, And maybe that's a point against me as just an uncreative person, but it did cause the Echoes mechanic to sort of lose its charm. It really is just the classic Zelda, unlock a new movement mechanic, use it here and there, and then find a new one and use it dressed up in a different way. Then you have the combat side for the Echoes, which, again, really cool at the offset. Zelda is not Link until she becomes Link. Initially, you have to just pick up pots, throw them at enemies to defeat them, and then you can get echoes of those enemies and make those enemies fight for you. However, at the end of the first dungeon, you just get a Link echo, so you can use a sword. And while it is a limited resource, it does still sort of just feel like the easiest way to approach a situation. Yes, you can have your minions fight for you, but it takes longer, it's slower. They're not the best at targeting necessarily. They can die pretty easily, so you're just always respawning them, and you just kind of get fed up and like, fine, I'm just going to hit this guy with the sword. I think there was a lot of potential here that was missed, where you really could have had some more curated environments where you really had to think. There actually is later in the game a little trial that you can unlock, a series of challenges that do limit your echoes or are curated experiences that you have to really think your way through. And I think if they had applied that more to the rest of the game, it would have really elevated it to a masterpiece status. That said, this game is still great. I loved playing through this game. It does feel like classic Zelda. And I see that as a pro, but I can also see that being a con. This is a game where you're not playing as Link, you are playing as Zelda, and yet it still just feels like a Zelda game for the most part. There isn't really that much to differentiate the experience. You could have had Link as the main playable character of this game, and nobody would have thought it was weird. I can see that upsetting some people who maybe expected a wider departure because of the different playable character. A key feature of the classic Zelda games are the dungeons. And unfortunately here, again, it feels like there's a lot of missed potential. While the world of Hyrule itself is a joy to explore with unique environments like the desert, the water, the jungle, Because all of the dungeons take place in this shadow realm, they all kind of become fairly samey and lack coherent themes. It's mostly just pieces of Hyrule that are floating in a void, and then once you get into the dungeons themselves, there's really not a lot that separates one from the other. Add to this the fact that there isn't a specific mechanic or item that is unique to that dungeon, and they really do start to blur together. The dungeons don't really have many puzzles to speak of in the classic sense. Again, there were a few items that I did really have to rack my brain. And to this game's credit, there are a lot of mechanics at play while you're exploring. You can create an echo, but you can also try your little fairy ally thing to possess objects and move them around. You can attach yourself to objects and let them move you. Then you also do have your sword and link mechanics, bows, bombs. Later in the game, you can project your echoes. So there's actually a lot of mechanics outside of just summoning echoes. There's a lot of auxiliary stuff that goes into it. But again, outside of one or two instances, it didn't really feel like it was fully explored to the maximum potential that it could have had. Visually, I love the game. I love this art style that they went with for both the Link's Awakening remake and now this game. However, some of the shortcomings of the engine have also not been resolved since that last game. Still saw a lot of slowdown. Not totally game-breaking, but you do see a little bit here and there. And again, the blurring at the top and bottom of the screen is still present, which definitely gets better or worse depending on where you are in the game and different areas, and it's especially in those times that it can actually be very visually unclear, which is unfortunate. The music is classic Zelda. If you like Zelda music, you're gonna like the music here. All the motifs are there. For better or for worse, this feels like another standard entry in the series. At the end of the day, The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom is kind of a mixed bag. I think overall, it's still good. I really enjoyed it, but there's just so much where the potential wasn't reached. The game starts very strong and introduces a lot to you and shows that it's a lot deeper and that there's a lot more to offer than maybe those initial trailers might have led you to believe. But once you get to about the halfway point in the game, you start to feel that it's getting old, it's repetitive. They didn't really expand on it as much as they could have. A bigger focus on using the echoes for puzzles, for more diversity in which echoes would be relevant in which situations, so that it didn't feel like you were just using the same handful of echoes for the entire game, would have gone such a long way. More puzzles, more challenges similar to those that you find later in the game as well, I think really would have enhanced this experience and really made you think into using some of the additional echoes that you found. Unfortunately, for the most part, every echo is just an iteration on another. A table is a table, whether it's a little high or a little taller or a little shorter, right? They all just end up feeling the same, and you end up just going back to the same one or two that you're kind of comfortable with. Yes, there are probably a ton of situations that I encountered that I could have handled differently. But when you can just make a bed staircase, why bother thinking of other solutions? You know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Unless you force me to be creative, I'm not gonna be, and I think that's probably true for a lot of other gamers. For value, I still think it's worth it. This is still a Zelda game, and it feels like a Zelda game, and if you're like me, if you prefer the old top-down Zeldas, this will scratch that itch. This is the kind of game I've been hoping they'd make for a while. Yes, Breath of the Wild is cool. Yes, the 3D Zeldas are cool, but for me, this is Zelda, and it was great to be able to play a new game in this style. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. What's your favorite Zelda game? What was your favorite echo to use in this game? If you liked the video, be sure to like the video, consider subscribing to the channel, and I will see you all with the next video.